Congratulations! Being assigned to manage your first software project must mean you are an up-and-coming superstar at your company. Maybe it is upgrading a financial systems package, building a new website, or selecting and implementing a new ERP system. It can be almost anything. While you're a great manager and actually really know the business, you don't know how to install and build software. You will obviously have some help, but if you're going to manage the project effectively, you need to understand the basics of what's going on. I've been helping managers like you run large software projects for nearly 30 years. I'll be sharing my experience and giving you the background you'll need to manage your own project. All projects have a people and process component. And in this modern age, 99.9% of them also have a software component. Your primary role will be to manage and coordinate all three of these components to make the project a success. What do I mean by the people component? I mean getting the people in the company to support your project or to at least use the software. Until the androids take over, this will also be the hardest part of the project. People are set in their ways and have their own agendas, which may not include the extra work your project will cause them. Consultants use the term change management to encompass the people aspects of a project. This usually just boils down to training and communication in most projects. In more complex projects, this could include designing new jobs, adjusting bonus incentives, layoffs, or staffing new offices. Whole books have been written about change management, and I'll provide more details in other videos. But for this overview, just remember that you can build the best software, yet it is worthless if people don't understand it or don't use it. Let's use COVID-19 vaccine as an example. I don't want to trigger a debate between vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, but I think we can all agree that developing the vaccine was easy compared to the effort expended to convince people it was safe and to get vaccinated. The vaccine was developed in a year, but I'm recording this 3 years later and people are still debating it. Except for the simplest of projects, the people or change management portion is going to be a huge effort with some of the highest risk. What does the process component entail? This refers to the business aspects of the project and more simply, the business process what the project is changing. For example, the business process scope could be financial reporting, customer service, distribution, warranties. Your project will be improving this process in some way and hopefully will ultimately increase the business's profit. In the simplest projects, this entails simply defining the scope and business case. In more complex projects, you're actually going to redesign and change the process. An example of scope would be domestic distribution of customer orders in North America, but not international shipments. This is the area where your project will focus, including a rationale for why you are excluding certain other processes. Maybe North American shipments are handled in SAP, while international shipments are handled in a freight forwarder system. If the biggest opportunity for improvement is in North America, it makes sense to focus on making modifications to SAP for now. The international shipments can be addressed in the future in a future project. The business case is simply what benefits will the owners of the business get for spending the money and time on your project. That obviously includes an estimate of the project costs and the benefits. There are, however, projects who don't have specific financial benefits, and these are usually regulatory compliance projects, which are there to avoid fines and keeping the owner out of prison. Lastly, we have the complex projects where we're actually redesigning the process. You don't want to automate or customize your software to support a process which is not perfect, right? So in this case, the way people or work is changing. So higher change management risk. And if you are changing the process, you need to do a lot of additional documentation. You need to document the current process, the future process, document new detailed procedures, and potentially redesign performance metrics. What is meant by the technology component of a software project? In general, it is a thing being built or modified. For this video, it is a software. It could be on a completely different type of project, a COVID-19 vaccine. It's the thing actually being built, the technology being built. The computer systems will be referred to as various names: information technology or IT, systems, software, or hardware. You'll most likely have a lot of help from your information technology department for much of this work. However, you don't want to be blindly dependent on your IT group. Especially, you need to understand how the people and process aspects of the project need to be run to support the technology work. I can't emphasize enough the importance of this component of the project, technology. If it is a software project, this is where the value is being added. The people and process components are supporting players. Therefore, an efficient project is going to focus on making the developers as productive as possible. The developers aren't adding value unless their fingers are on keyboards doing coding. They're not adding value when they're sitting in meetings and their time's being wasted on various reviews and things. If in a software project, the software doesn't work, then all the good process and training and communication are for naught. So the other aspect is when projects go wrong, usually the blame is laid at the feet of the IT department and the developers for sloppy coding, being too slow, etc. However, this is rarely the case. In most cases, it's a systemic issue about how the project was managed. The system requirements were late or sloppy, training was poor or non-existent, testing was poorly designed. The list goes on, but boils down to the product owner and or the project manager didn't do a good job of supporting and feeding the developers the information they needed, and didn't manage the people and process aspects of the project properly. Okay, we've talked about the three components that make up the pillars of any good project: the people, the process, and technology. Now let's talk about the software development lifecycle, which is this timing, the stages a project goes through. All right, and those stages are the plan, analyze, design, build, test, and deploy. Now, there are variations of these based on whether you are doing custom development or buying off-the-shelf software, but the basic process is consistent. You will only be performing the plan stage once within your project, but if you have multiple releases, you'll be looping back through these other stages through the analyze, design, build, test with each release. Now, I'm going to develop future videos which will dive into the details of each of these stages, but right now I'm going to give you a summary of each stage. So let's start with the plan stage. Plan stage is pretty obvious. You're planning the project and making high-level directional decisions before performing detailed analysis. Some of the key decisions are: you're doing a high-level business case. Now, this is just back of the envelope type of roughly how long do you think it's going to take, how much is going to cost, Where do the benefits lie? You don't even really need to quantify all the benefits, but is this bigger than a bread box? Then what are the high-level software requirements? At a very high level, what are you going to need the software to do? Also, are we going to need any interfaces, key interfaces between software systems? Because those are usually a separate kind of build effort within the project. Next, the question is on software is always, should I build it from scratch or should I buy something off the shelf? That is going to have huge impacts on the timing and the way you run this project. So you need to, hopefully in the plan stage, come to a good gelling of, yes, we either want to build this from scratch or we want to buy it. And some projects have combinations of both of these things. And then the next question is, before we go on to the project, do we need some external help? Do I need a consultant to help with the plan stage? Do I need maybe a strategy consultant like McKinsey to help develop the business case? Do I need a project management expert to help with the make versus buy decision? If I'm buying an off-the-shelf software product, I usually need to bring in some consultants who are experts on configuring that software. So do I need some external help? Because I need to get it identified, I need to get them on board before we move on to the next stage of the project. And then what is the high-level timeline? Logically, how would we group the functionality we're trying to accomplish into releases so we can get things released as soon as possible in small buckets, can iterate? And then roughly how long is it going to take for each of the releases? Now, a good project manager can look at a project, the functionality being built, or a good IT manager and say, yeah, this feels like a month, this feels like 3 months, this feels like 12 months. They're trying to get that high-level timeline developed. And then the last question is, we've done this initial work, should we continue on to the next stage of the project? Or after doing this work, have we determined that this project is a dud? It's not worth our time or money or energy, etc. And then we got to usually have a stage gate meeting where we're going to these sponsors and the steering committee and saying, yes, we've done some back of the envelope. We think this is how much it's going to cost, how much it's take, and we think it's worth it. Can we go ahead and spin up a full real project team to do the detailed analysis work and continue on into the project? The analyze phase for the first release of a large project can take several months, especially if you have to select off-the-shelf software you want to purchase. For small projects where you're doing custom coding or you're doing work in an existing software package, this phase can take only a few weeks. The key deliverables for the analyze phase are, number one, you need to do a detailed current state review. You need to understand how things are currently done. This allows you to develop detailed software requirements, understand the required process changes, identify improvement metrics, and who will be impacted by the changes. Then you need to develop your future process. You don't want to automate a suboptimal process, and that future process may result in additional software requirements. And last, you need to document the detailed software requirements for the first release. Now, it's pertinent, you only need to do this for the first release. And this will be everything that the developers will need to design and build the software. Now, for later releases, you can stagger them. So you can do the requirements for the later releases at a later date or just in time leading up to the next build phase. And then you also need to finalize your business case. So develop the final cost and benefit estimates that will be used to measure success of the project. And finally, if you are doing off-the-shelf software, this is the phase where you have to go through your detailed software selection process and then purchase the software. So you have the software up and running for the next phases of design and build where you'll be configuring the software package. The design phase is focused on software design, as the business and the process design work has already been done in the analyze phase. This phase is extremely short for small projects making changes to existing software. So in fact, software development is so quick these days, it is often easier to build a prototype of something and review it with end users rather than spending a ton of time on detailed design. If you are building from scratch on a large project, the main deliverables are, first, you must install the software if you're purchasing software off the shelf. So the software vendor and perhaps a supporting contractor who's an expert in the software will join the project now that the contracts have been signed. And they will have a series of questions that will need to be answered to perform the initial install and setup of the software so that detailed configuration can start in a later phase. Then the second thing you need is a technical design. For custom builds, the technical team will design the software components like databases, user interfaces, and system interfaces. Now the build phase is the fun phase. So this is where the team actually starts building software. So in the case of custom code, you're doing the custom coding. In the case of a software package, you're doing the detailed configuration work. Also, you have probably heard of the agile software methodology, and this is the phase where that is applied. Agile is about how do you build software quickly and efficiently. Now, you should assume that you're going to use an agile approach because this is the de facto methodology for modern software development, and I highly recommend it. So also, as a manager, if you're doing agile, you should expect to see progress from your development team daily. They should be closing user stories daily. I've had projects where we've closed close to 60 user stories in a day when we're really humming along. All right, that's been some days you may only get 2 or 3. And then there should be a formal demo every 2 to 3 weeks where they're demonstrating all the functionality that has been built during that sprint period, it's called. And the last piece to build is testing, which is confusing because immediately following this stage, there is a test stage. But what is the testing that's done in the build stage is the testing that the IT group, the technical group, does of their coding. So they're doing what's called unit testing. So as each developer does his own little piece of code, he's running a unit test to make sure it works. And then they're combining all the developers' code together and doing what's called a system test, make sure all the components work together. And so that testing is being going on in this stage. Now it gets even more confusing because it really shouldn't be a clear dividing line between, hey, we do all the build and then we throw it over the wall to the business to do user acceptance testing. So what typically goes on is as soon as a piece of functionality is coded and unit tested and system tested, it's handed off to the business and the business jumps right in and starts doing the acceptance testing. So the two stages will overlap. Like we just discussed a minute ago, the test stage and the build stage should overlap, with the test stage ending with formal user acceptance testing using real life users. So the test stage is really focused on acceptance testing. It's called user acceptance testing. The people who are going to actually use the software are giving their thumbs up. Yes, you built it the way I need it, right? Or thumbs down. No, you didn't. I need to go change something. Now, I usually break this testing into 2 parts. One is acceptance testing by the team. So the business analyst who actually wrote the requirements, IT says, hey, we've built this, we've unit tested it, we think it's good to go. That business analyst goes in there and they are going to test the component, the functionality, based on their understanding of the requirements and the acceptance criteria that they developed. And they're going to say, yeah, you did, IT, you did hit it, or you didn't, and eventually kick it back to the developers. The second piece of testing is actually taking the finished product out to the users in the company and sitting them down and telling them to carve out a day, bring them in a conference room, wherever, and having them actually run through specific scenarios and testing the software like how they would use it in the day-to-day work. Now that type of testing is very involved to organize. You've got to do a lot of work on setting up test environments with test data for the users, things like that. So you don't want to do that testing until you internally have done all the testing you can, and you don't want to do it piecemeal, right? So that's how you can learn more about that in future videos. So, and then the other issue is, as soon as those end users get their hands on the software and start doing some testing, they're going to come up with additional requirements. Oh, I forgot to mention this, or they're going to find little bugs and things like that. And then your job as the product owner is going to be to prioritize those requirements, bugs, and make the ultimate decision of, are these so severe that we've got to change them before we release the first release, or can we wait until a future release? All right, and the other two, the next component to the test phase has nothing really to do with testing, and that is release planning. So you're getting close to releasing the software, doing your deployment, your launch. And so that means that you need to start planning in advance. You can't just one day wake up and say, hey, we're going to release. So the team needs to start doing that release planning, based on how the testing is going, what do we think is a reasonable release date, and then start backing off that date with all the tasks that need to be done. And then the next component to that is you can't release this to your company until you've actually trained the users on how to use it. So you typically would start building the training related to the software during this stage also, so there's not a huge lag between you finishing testing, saying it's ready to go, and getting everybody trained and getting it released. If you wait until all the testing is completed, there's going to be a long lag. You're going to need several months, whatever, for people to build the training. So it's a little bit of an art and a dance to say, well, is the software stable enough and tested enough that I'm not wasting the trainer's time to build the training right now, versus trying to get everything moved up if possible. The deploy stage covers all the activities required to put the software into use, to release it to the world. And the key deliverables are, first, user training. You've got to train the users on how to use the software and any new processes that you're implementing. Number two is software migration. So the software was coded or configured in an environment which only the team could access. So it is developed in a development environment. It is then moved into a testing environment. It is then moved into a training or QA environment for training. And finally, it's moved into what's called a production environment. And that is the environment that the end users can access and use it. Now, actually moving this software is a very involved process. Probably have a whole video just on that subject. But you just need to be aware, as a manager, that IT will run most of that. But as a manager, you need to understand that that is not a simple process, and it has to be planned accordingly. All right, and then the last piece is communication, right? So everyone who would be impacted by the software, but they may not need to be trained on how to use it, but they could be impacted by it, need to understand the impacts and any actions they have to take as a result. So that is the software development life cycle. Now, this cycle will repeat itself. So in most projects, you have more than one release. And what you need to do is you need to stagger the work on those releases. So remember that in the analyze stage, the business analysts were doing their detailed requirements for the first release. Well, then we move into design and build, which is primarily the IT developers doing the work. So at this point, the business analysts should start doing the requirements for the second release while they're waiting for the build to be completed, so there's something for them to test. So you stagger these things, and then when the developers are done building for release 1, they have all the requirements they need for release 2 to start that build. All right, so that is the software development life cycle, and we're going to move on to roles. Okay, so we've talked about the software development life cycle. Now let's talk about the various roles within that life cycle. Hundreds of people can work on a large software project, and the various responsibilities are quite numerous. So they basically boil down to a few key roles. So this is going to be an overview of those key roles. The first role we'll talk about is the product owner. This is you. It can go by various different names like product owner, product manager, program manager, VP/director of X project. But it basically means that this is the person that upper management is holding responsible for the overall success of the project. The other key responsibility the product owner has is to prioritize the functionality. Which functionality gets into the software, which functionality gets left out. Also, prioritizing that functionality. Which functionality has to be in the first release, and which functionality can wait to later releases. And finally, bugs. Which bugs have to be fixed before you can release the software, and which bugs can wait to be fixed in the future. The next role is the project sponsor. This is the manager whose budget is paying for the project, and they are the ones primarily benefiting from the project, which is why they are willing to pay for it. Since they are paying for the project, they obviously have the final say in all major decisions. Therefore, they have to be kept informed so they are confident their money is being spent well. The steering committee members. These are the managers whose departments will be most impacted by the project. They also will have to be convinced to lend resources to the project, either to work on the project team or to be trained. They will need to be consulted on key project decisions that impact their departments, and they obviously want to be kept informed on the progress of the project. The project manager. This is the person experienced at running software projects, which will help you by running the day-to-day aspects of the project. On an agile project, this role can be called the Scrum Master. On small projects, the same person can fill both the role of the product owner and the project manager. The IT architect. This is the person who will guide the team on key project technical decisions and designs. They will make decisions like what language to code in, how to structure the database, etc. On large projects, there may be several different types of architects specializing in different technologies, such as a database architect or a security architect, etc. The business analyst. This is the person documenting the processes, the business case, and the software requirements. They ensure the developers have the information they need to build great software. In many cases, the business analyst will also be doing some of the testing and either assisting or building the training. The developers. These are the people actually coding the software or configuring the off-the-shelf software. These are the people that make the magic happen, and all the roles we've talked about are basically supporting roles so the developers can create great software. A key concept that managers struggle with on their first software project are the many software environments. Think of the environments as different snapshots of the software in time. Different companies use different names, but they typically use all 4 environments for the same basic function. So the first is the development environment. This is where the developers do their coding or configuration work. This is the Wild West. It is chaotic and unstable. There can be dozens of developers making changes simultaneously. Testing. There will be a normal process to periodically move changes from the development environment to the testing environment. The changes will be moved for a specific release so that it can be tested. This environment will be much more stable, and should reflect the changes going into the next release. The QA and training environment. Now this can be either one environment or two separate environments, and they serve several purposes. In between releases, the QA environment is a duplicate of the production environment with either a full copy of data or a near full copy of data. It is used to investigate production bugs. Just prior to a release, this environment is updated with the new code that has passed testing and is set up with data to be used for training. Production. This is where the work is done. All end users must be trained and ready before release changes are moved to this environment, or they won't know how to use the software. Some key environment concepts you need to understand as manager of the project are, first, setting up these environments is a lot of work. If you are working on existing software, these environments should already be set up. But if you're building entirely new software, then these environments need to be created. Number two, access to these environments is controlled separately. The project team works in the development, testing, and QA training environments. Then separate usernames and logins will have to be assigned to each team member to access the various environments. In fact, developers are not given access to production. That forces that all changes that they make have to flow from the development environment where they work up to testing, then to QA, and then finally into production. And you're doing checks and rechecks all along the way. The last key concept is that migrating the changes to the software between the environments is also a lot of work. And it's easy to mess up. So you have 3 times practice, right, to get it right. And you need that practice so that IT ensures that they can do this quickly, smoothly, and accurately when you do the final move to production. In fact, IT should be automating the process of migrating the code as much as possible. And therefore, you're ensured that the move to production will be perfect. And then after you migrate code from one environment to another, you as product owner need to make sure that a test is done to confirm that the changes were migrated to the new environment correctly. Now, I've given you an overview of the key subject areas for managing a software project. Of course, we've just scratched the surface. I'll be adding more videos on these various subjects to flesh out the details. But remember this, your role is to represent the business and ultimately to ensure that the project goals and business benefits are achieved. If you assemble a good team, you'll have the help you need to execute the details. But hopefully I've armed you with enough so you can speak a common language with your expert teammates. Now, last thing, I don't expect I'm going to get rich making YouTube videos on projects, software projects. But if you like this content, the best way for you to give me feedback that you would like additional videos on these subjects would be to subscribe or like the video. I need that motivation to make these videos because they're a lot of work. So if you like them, please subscribe or like.